Welcome to the Principles of Good Health podcast, where I provide you with straightforward and practical nutrition and lifestyle advice, helping you lead a happier, healthier, and more active life. I hope you enjoy the show.
I'm Dave Price, and welcome to the studio, Caroline Petton. Caroline, how you doing?
I'm very good. Nice to see you again, Dave.
All right, it's been a month or so, but yeah, it's nice being treating you well then.
Yeah, good. Yeah, everything's good. Thank you. Here we are as we record this, heading into winter now, and clocks have changed, and that can be a challenge for some people, can't it?
Oh, it can indeed. It suddenly had a massive impact on us. Suddenly, all the dark nights coming in so much quicker.
Yeah, definitely.
Ah. So before we kick off, and I wanted to get into the depth of the interview. I thought it'd be useful just to give a little background to yourself, because there have been a lot of people who wouldn't have actually seen our conversations before at all. So,
Mm.
bit of background about you and what you do.
Of course. So, Caroline Peyton, my company's Peyton Principles. I'm an experienced nutritionist, naturopath specializing in gut health. I've been in practice nearly 15 years now. And prior to that, I worked quite long term in the corporate sector, sort of middle management positions. For nearly 20 years, I did that before retraining. And now I've been doing this for nearly 15 years, working a lot of time on one-to-one, helping individuals find lasting relief from often quite chronic symptoms that they might have experienced, but not always. But also, I'm really passionate about sharing my knowledge. So I do go into corporates, other workplaces, give talks to share the power of nutrition to help, really help people perform better, feel better in their lives.
Oh, and as you say, you actually specialize in gut health specifically. Just
Yeah.
why is that?
Well, when I qualified, and as I said, I trained as a naturopath, and hopefully we'll get on and talk a bit more about that.
Yeah.
But naturopaths have always said health, disease starts in the gut. So whenever I was working with individuals, I would always want to ensure that we'd maximize digestive capability, get it working at its best. Be thinking about supporting, good bowel regularity, getting rid of those toxins. And science is finally catching up. And because of the success I had helping people with that, and the impact that has in other areas of their health. And of course, now with the science really catching up, and we hear so much about the gut microbiome in different aspects of health, that 90% of disease starts in the gut, which is quite astounding. So yeah, I down that route. 90% of disease can originate from the gut. So understanding what is going on can be a really powerful first step to helping people.
I never realized it was so high. It had such an impact and influence on your whole body.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a massive amount of research now about the gut microbiome, and beyond that, digestive capability, and all of that. It's quite remarkable. And that's why you hear a lot about gut-brain link, for example. A lot of people talk about the gut-brain connection. That's just one aspect of it. That we know about. But yes, the gut microbiome is really influencing so many aspects of our health. And about 70% of maybe more of our immunity starts in our gut. We've got immune cells, there's a lot of immunity in the gut. So, even just thinking from an immune point of view, what's going on in the gut that could be hindering your immune system from working at its best?
Right. And sorry, forgive my ignorance, but I've never heard the brain gut connection before.
Haven't you? Well, there's such a thing known as the enteric nervous system that links directly from the gut to the brain. There's this two-way flow of communication. Most of our serotonin is produced in the gut, doesn't appear to cross the gut-brain barrier, but it's certainly influencing what's going on in the brain. We've got our microbiomes producing different metabolites that can be influencing the brain and how it's working. And just saying to people, well, when you're nervous for an exam and you get butterflies in your stomach,
Yeah.
that type of thing, you can see how there's that link, and it is very much a two-way flow of communication.
Right. Yeah. Something I hadn't thought of or realized at all before.
And that's just one snippet of how the gut is influencing other aspects of the body. And this concept of microbiome, and we're very familiar with the gut microbiome, but we've got microbiomes all over our body that, again, science is discovering and learning more about. And it's considered that the gut microbiome is like the conductor of the orchestra, communicating with these other microbiome communities around the body. So it's quite fascinating. You know, the more I learn, and I never stop learning, I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly doing CPD, continuous professional development webinars, reading things. You know, I never stop learning, just like the rest of the world has never stopped, the public, and never stop. We never stop learning about this because I think we're just at the beginning of what we're discovering around the gut microbiome, the human microbiome, biomes, I should say.
Right. You really feel as though there's so much more to
So
find.
much, so much. I've got a presentation around the wonderful world of the gut microbiome that I present to organizations and different groups. And I put a slide in there, not a current slide, that showed the growth in research from 2016 to 2020, 21, because it dropped off a bit through COVID, but it just this steep increase in research that's taking place in this space.
When you say gut bio, I sort of get
Yes.
that term. But as soon as you said that you have biomes in other parts of your body, I'd never
Yes.
even realized that.
We do. The oral microbiome is really important. We know that bacteria we can swallow, and there are certain people who may have heart issues, and they'll have to be very careful when they go to see a dentist because of the oral microbiome. We need to balance that. You can test for that. There's a vaginal microbiome, a urinary microbiome. There's a skin microbiome around, and there's microbiome around our lungs. It influences, you know, the birth of children. They pick up their first exposure to bacteria when they're born. We're just really just learning. The one we know best, well, know more about, I should say, is the gut. But we're learning so much around about the whole human microbiome and the microbiomes and what is going on. So it's really fascinating.
Well, no, very exciting that suddenly all this research
Yes.
is coming out.
Yes.
But because one of the things I was going to ask you, because a lot of people seem to be struggling with digestive issues at the moment.
Mm.
Is this new? Is this our diet? Did this happen 50 years ago? We weren't aware of it.
Well, I couldn't say what the scale of the problem was 50 years ago, but it's very much a modern thing. Like many conditions seem to be escalating, don't they, in terms of the number of people suffering in different ways. The thing about digestion and the digestive problems that people are having, we have to go back to basics. People are leading extremely busy lifestyles. If you rush your food, if you rush eating, you are hindering your digestive capability. You're not breaking down food properly because you're not taking your time to sit and eat your meal in a calm environment, and that's not always possible, you're going to be limiting your ability to digest that food. So that immediately could start creating some digestive problems and symptoms. Then, of course, we've got all the issue around ultra processed foods that people are living on now. We don't have the sort of whole food diet that we would have had 50 years ago. I think the exposure to pesticides and herbicides, the whole toxicity element, it's far more abundant. The number of chemicals that are being used to produce food now is way more than it was then. We cannot ignore the fact of the impact that these chemicals, again, going back to the gut microbiome, is having. So just looking at those factors alone, I think those three things are having a huge impact on why so many people struggle with digestion today.
Right. It's everything seems to be bad news in the food industry with the UPFs, the increase in
Yes.
pesticides, etc.
Mm.
Are you seeing the tide turning in any way on that at the moment?
Well, not from the food manufacturers, um, but I guess from the people that come and see me, they're very much aware that there are other options open to them. And I'm hoping that I'm beginning to raise awareness that if people get diagnosed with um, IBS, or in fact, if they've been to see somebody and told there isn't really much wrong with them, yet they are still suffering, that actually there is light at the end of the tunnel and it doesn't need to be that way. But I think people are still possibly have their heads in the sand a little bit about why are they struggling and yet maybe don't associate it until I start explaining these simple things like rush your food, you can't digest your food properly. Then people start going, well, yeah, I get that. That makes sense, actually. Yes.
Does
When did
when you
you last all sit round a table and eat a meal together? And when did you last, it's a lot of people, busy lifestyles, are eating in the cars or in their vans. And the body doesn't have a chance to process the fact that we're asking the body to be digesting food and to be prepared for it and to be releasing digestive secretions in order to do that. We just think we can just eat on the go and everything's going to be fine until eventually your body goes, I can't do this for you anymore. I need some help and support. And I think often, not always, but often that starts to kick in with many things from the age of about 40. I think in many ways the body's very good at coping and looking after you, which is what it will always try and do until you get to about the age of 40. And then I think the body sort of starts to go, hold on a moment. Can you start listening? I've been sending you out little signals and little messages and little signals here and there to tell you things aren't perfect. But of course, we carry on and we have our busy lives and we keep rushing around. And then something gets worse and something else gets worse until you get to the point where this is not good, you know. Yeah. Sorry, that was a bit of a rambling answer, Dave, but I
no,
hope that
no, I love it.
explained the situation we've got to as a society.
Yeah, 'cause one thing I was going to ask you about, most people's route, if they feel there's something wrong, will go down to their GP, a medical practitioner or whatever. You just mentioned something there before. Sometimes they can be told by the medical profession there's not actually anything wrong or anything they can find wrong at all.
Yeah.
Why should somebody come to you after they've had that sort of medical opinion?
It's a fair point. You would hope that if you've been to see the medical profession, they'd have the answers for you. And I would always encourage people to go to their medical profession to rule out anything more sinister that might be going on. That's a good thing to do. But then if you end up being told, having had a multitude of tests, that there doesn't appear to be anything wrong, and a label that often gets given to people is IBS. Oh, it's IBS, and then that's it. They're then left in a quandary as to what to do next, because the medical profession are excellent at diagnosing. And once there is a diagnosis, they can then give a medication for it. But in many instances, there is no medication to give. They can't find anything wrong, but people are still suffering in many different ways. My approach is to sort of go back to basics. I start talking to people about how are they eating? What's the stress levels like? What sort of foods are you feeding your body? I have a very in-depth understanding about digestion. And what I mean by that is that first stage of digestion is sight and smell of food will start to trigger digestive secretions. And then that has a domino knock-on effect throughout the whole of the rest of your digestion, your stomach, your small intestines, what might be going on in your colon, thinking about the gut microbiome. So there's lots of different areas to investigate. And as a naturopath, one of the first things I would always want to resolve for people, try to help resolve, is something like constipation, because that just results in toxicity in the body, which we don't want hanging around. And there are more natural ways to really encourage good bowel movements, whether it's too fast or too slow. There are natural ways to do that. So there are many ways that I can help people that doesn't require medication, but always good to go to your doctor to rule out that there's nothing more serious that could be going on, first of all.
Right. But then to move on to yourself if they're not
Mhm.
getting that.
Yeah. And indeed, it'd be good if people came to me early on before things got really bad, because we could nip it all in the bud very early on if it was something quite straightforward before things get worse and worse and worse.
Is that quite a common theme then? People come to you when they should have come to you 6 months, a year, or whatever.
Ideally, Dave. Yeah, most people will come to me. I always say it's like at the end of the road, almost like a last resort, because of, naturally with our medical profession, you would want to go down that route. A lot of people, not everybody would, but a lot of people come to me as a last resort. And then you're trying to unpick things which have become quite chronic, more longer term. There's a lot more going on. Whereas if people came to me much sooner, we could hopefully nip things in the bud very early on before it got to that stage.
Yeah, makes total sense. But yeah, I can see why people might be nervous of coming to yourself
Yeah.
after medical diagnosis. But Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And because one of the big culprits I hear all the time at the moment is gluten is the big issue. And dairy as well seems to be getting a really bad reputation. I
Mm.
mean, is your view, yep, everybody should stop taking those, or how do you approach those two specifically?
I don't like to do extreme things for my clients. I like to keep things as simple and easy as possible. I'm not saying, and I never would say to somebody that potentially dairy or gluten is the culprit and therefore you can't ever eat it again. Imagine how difficult that is for people to incorporate into their lifestyles, and
Mm.
socially as well. But going back to what I was talking about, digestion, if we can support digestion, very often the foods that may be a problem, you can start to digest them better and therefore they don't cause the problem. And by looking at people's diets, often I notice an overload of foods. Very typically in the Western world, we have an overload of gluten, wheat. We have an overload of dairy in the diet. So I help people find alternatives to eat that they can easily incorporate into their lives, reduce the burden of those foods, and then to see if that helps support things. Because most people can, I feel, can still eat these foods in moderation if those turn out to be the problems. And that people can then understand that, they could go and eat it if they were caught out or eating socially, and it wouldn't then cause a problem. And I find in only very, very small instances would you get a situation where someone would have to completely exclude a particular food group, actually. Yeah.
Right. Because I could imagine some people would be nervous of coming to you because their expectation would be, right, that's it, no more cheese ever again. Um, where you're taking quite a different approach.
Yes, I would never want somebody to feel nervous about, oh gosh, she's going to criticize what I'm eating today, or it's going to be impossible to work with her. I get people saying to me, I have a very busy lifestyle and I'm not sure it's going to be possible to work with you because I'm worried you're going to make it too difficult. And I like to reassure people that's not how I work with anybody. My main focus is to keep it simple, keep it easy, fit with their lifestyle. That's, the absolute priorities. And I would never criticize anyone. We're all human. I'm human. Understand, I'll eat a piece of cake. I like a glass of wine. But I just work with the individual and hopefully through the explanations I give as to why eating in a certain way or certain foods could be contributing to their specific symptoms. Once people have an understanding and I help give them alternatives to eat, then they are sort of more open to trying new things. And once they try new things and they might get and hopefully get results, then they're more invested and interested in making changes longer term. But the absolute priority is our work with anyone with their any restrictive diets. But I might try and, my role is to try and help them find alternatives, but absolutely to keep it simple, because if you don't, then it won't be a success for the individual. And I want success for my clients. I want people to, get relief from their symptoms, but in the easiest way possible.
It sounds as though it's a lot sort of coaching rather than you go to a doctor, there's a prescription, take that.
Yeah.
Talking to yourself, it's much more fluid than that, actually.
It is a sort of coaching, and as I'm a trained naturopath, one of the tenets that we say is that we act as an educator, and that's a big part of what I do is around the education, and trying to help people, encourage people, and educating people around why X might be causing or contributing to Y, and working with them, and be a listening ear for people. Most often, because of the constraints for GPs, etc., they don't get much time with an individual. I spend 90 minutes at an initial consultation with a client. 90 minutes. I want to know as much about them as possible. They can tell me anything in absolute confidence. And I like to be reassuring, hopefully show some empathy and listen. And nothing is sort of off limits as far as I'm concerned, and nothing would go any further than between the two of us. There could be, I've had situations, whether it's with friends or in a business setting, where I've worked with individuals but the rest of the group wouldn't know I've worked with that individual unless they chose to say. I would never even say I'm working with an individual. It's very, very confidential, the work that I do.
Right. Even when you're presenting in group settings, when you're working with businesses and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so say I was in a group setting or yeah, in a business setting, and I happen to have worked with an individual there, I would never make reference to having worked with that individual. It's absolutely confidential. Not only is their situation and their circumstances confidential, the very fact that I've worked with them is confidential because a lot of it is can be seen as very personal, could be embarrassing. They don't want people to be aware. And I would always respect. Now, sometimes they would be the first to say, Caroline's really helped me with this or helped me with that. That's on their terms. That's their choice. But I would not be the one to mention it.
Right. Yeah, that real strict confidentiality all the way
Absolutely.
through.
It's really important from an ethical point of view.
Yeah, and that actually just listening to your clients, and it's not just listening to the problem, it's actually understanding their habit and their lifestyle as well.
Absolutely. I go right back. I go back to I want to know about childhood illnesses. I want to know about family history of family illnesses to see if there's, inherent link that's following through there. Sometimes I can pick up trends that happen through infancy or in childhood that I can see can be influencing something that's going on now. And sometimes my questioning, I'm sure initially some of my clients might wonder why I ask some of these questions, but it all becomes clear later on. And often it's with that one-to-one, it may not even be a standard question, but by listening to them, it prompts me to then ask another question. And it's the listening that draws out things that I think that's an interest. They've just said something really interesting that I feel is a major factor contributing to whatever symptoms they may have.
Right. You're listening out for the little crumbs to lead
Mm,
the path.
always. Yes.
Yeah. Which, as you say, with a doctor, 10 minutes they'd get if they were lucky.
Something I've used in the past when I've done a presentation is to say like my work as a detective. I see, in a way, what I'm doing is a bit like detective work, really, but in a structured way.
Yeah, no, you just surprised me when you said you would ask about childhood issues, which
Mm,
was
yeah,
a while ago for someone of my age anyway. But
it
they can still have bearings and impacts.
can because it could be that inherent, let me call it like an inherent weakness in the body that's represented itself 20, 30 years later. There could be a link that I pick up.
Right. God, it's fascinating, isn't it? I was going to say, so what actually sets you apart from a normal nutritionist, shall we say? I think I've got my view. I'm beginning to get a feel very much, but
Well, talking about, as a naturopath, it is taking that 360-degree view, holistic approach to an individual. Like I said, I want to know as much about them as possible. I want to understand, that the body's got this inherent healing capability. So I'm always like looking out and listening for different things that can support and help them. As a naturopath, I've had training, not as a fully trained, but I have had training in herbs, a little bit of homeopathy, tissue salts, EFT tapping. So I can bring some of this into my practice that potentially other nutritionists might not have had training in. My main therapy is nutrition, but I can bring these other aspects into my practice. And I've been in practice nearly 15 years. So I have a lot of experience of working with individuals. That doesn't mean to say that people newly qualified do not have anything to offer. I was newly qualified once, and I know that we've always got a huge amount that we can bring to any situation with any client. But I feel I've got a lot of experience, a lot of clinical experience that I can draw on in my practice now.
yeah, and you sound very inquisitive, not just in people, but in new things, new discoveries that they're all affecting this sort of thing.
I think most of us as in our training, we are inquisitive because we know things do not stand still. There's always new research that we have to keep abreast of. Um, but yes, that inquisitiveness is very important. Yeah, really important.
But again, even you mentioned regarding tapping then, which I
Yes.
wouldn't have put anything to do with gut health or nutrition.
No, it's that naturopathic approach. So, as a naturopath, it is understanding this sort of, I use this sort of term 360-degree approach, but we have to recognize the impact of emotional, mental impact, stress. We can just use the word stress, but understanding the impact that that has on the entire body. And naturopaths have always recognized that. So how can you help heal somebody? And I use it with inverted commas. How can we help to heal the body, bring the body back into balance, unless you address that? Sometimes I don't even use nutrition initially with a client. I want to be highlighting to the individual the impact of the lifestyle that they're leading is having on them, and from a stress point of view, and trying to bring in ways to calm the body down, because unless we bring that calming approach into the body, we're constantly firefighting. And so tapping, you know a bit about tapping, Dave, do you?
A little bit. I've done a little bit of NLP as well,
Yeah,
and yeah, I was. It's that world. I was thinking it more from a mental perspective, should I say, rather than
yeah,
a physical perspective.
yeah. But I draw that in as well, because there is this whole rounded approach to working with an individual. You can't just ignore certain element. The same with structure of the body. So as a naturopath, I trained a bit in body work. No, I can't do body work on an individual, but my training around understanding structure of the body and spinal alignment, and if the vertebrae is slightly out of alignment, you can cause, impingement on nerves that could be affecting digestion. So if I pick up that somebody's had whiplash or had an accident or had a fall, I would be saying, have you been to see an osteopath or a bodywork specialist? Have you done that? Because I think that's worth getting that checked out in case there is a slight issue with that that could be hindering, digestion, or it could be actually enhancing nerve flow to an organ, for example, or impinging it. So, it's those little things that could really make a difference.
Yeah, as you can see, it would never have crossed my mind that whiplash would have anything to do with this at all.
So,
But yeah, now you actually explain it, it does make a lot more
yeah.
sense.
If people are sitting at their laptops all day long, the structure of the body is so bad, and a lot of the nerves that feed the digestive organs come out very high up from the spine, the vertebral column. And so, if you've got tightness in your neck and you're stiff in your neck, it could be playing a part.
Yeah, now you say it does make total sense. Yes.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you this earlier, actually. You keep using the term a naturopath.
Yes.
Um, can you explain exactly what that is?
Yes, it's not well understood in the UK, very well understood in America, Germany, Australia, I would say. Naturopathy comes from the word nature cure. So if we go right back in time, it was understanding, natural approaches, good food, water, sunlight, fresh air, sleep, you think about, and movement and exercise would be the foundations of it. But it's understanding the healing power of nature. And we're so far removed from that really today. But in its very simplistic terms, it's recognizing the healing power of nature, and providing the tools to support the body, because the body has, as naturopaths would say, the body has an inherent ability to heal itself, provided it's given the right tools. The right tools could be helping the person to sleep better, relieving stress, providing the nutrients that the body might be missing. Yeah, but in very just those few little things, you want to give the body the tools, and understanding that if you take care of the body and you know what tools to give it, the body wants to be able to heal itself, but it needs to know, helping the person recognize what the body needs to heal itself. That's very simplistic terms of what naturopathy is. So it's a whole approach, healing approach. And my main modality therapy is nutritional therapy. So that's the main thing I bring to working with an individual.
Right. I know we touched on this earlier, but where do the two communities stand generally between the natural healing, as you say,
Hmm.
compared to the drug industry.
Sadly, we're worlds apart, but I think most of us in the world that I live in would love a more integrated approach. I think it could be so powerful what we could do if we worked together, um, because we would help to reduce the burden on the NHS, would help to reduce the burden cost of medicines, would help to take that burden off the individual of requiring so many medicines. They have the expertise in using the tools to help to diagnose an individual. But if you bring in the more natural approach to it and really work with the individual, I think the world would be a much better place, happier, healthier place, is my view. And I think it's very sad that we're worlds apart. But I think most people in my world would want to be more connected. It just hasn't happened.
It would make total sense from my perspective to be more
Yeah.
connected. What's the driver behind that? Is that the medical industry not wanting to engage so much, or do you
I
have
think we're
a
going down a whole political topic that's beyond the
right?
scope of this. Yes.
Yeah, we'll stay away from the politics there.
Yes.
Um, so other than sort of gut digestion concerns, what other types of clients do you help?
I would say a lot of people come to me because they often have a multitude of symptoms. They're just not feeling great. They could have, absolute fatigue, and I mean being on their knees type fatigue, immune problems, constantly getting colds, headaches, migraines that they can't get to the bottom of, excuse the pun. Because I work with the whole person, individual, then, I can really support that. Whereas with the medical profession, you'd get a drug for this, a drug for that, an expert in this, an expert in that, but they don't pull a whole lot together. Ladies going through the menopause, perimenopause, people with chronic fatigue, maybe autoimmune conditions. I can really help to support all sorts of people. But yeah, those would be my strengths, I would say.
But because there's a few things you mentioned there that I wouldn't put down to, or I would have assumed weren't down to nutrition.
Oh, what would those be?
Um, such as headaches and
Oh,
fatigue, and
yes, absolutely.
I might just show my ignorance now.
No, it's. I think a lot of people think, oh, as a nutritionist, you're looking at helping people with weight loss, and that's actually not what I focus on ever with an individual. People don't come to me for weight loss. It's usually a consequence of working with me, but that's not the priority. People will come to me because they are fed up of living with symptoms. They're not feeling great. This whole aspect of vitality. They're feeling pretty rubbish, and yet it does not need to be like that. I am trained to work with um, all sorts of medical conditions. I'm trained to work and support them. And so I have this, very in-depth understanding of all sorts of medical conditions and ways to work and support people using nutrition to help them. So yeah, I can help with all sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah, it's just not the automatic links that
Yeah.
people would make. That's all. Yeah, it's interesting. Such a wide variety of.
Yeah, people with long, like chronic fatigue, these people suffering with long COVID, which is like chronic fatigue. There is so much we can do using nutrition.
Again, nutrition and long COVID, I wouldn't have put the two together at all as being linked.
Yes, absolutely.
But presumably that must be quite a common view among the general public.
I
So,
think people are unaware, yes, and it's trying to raise that awareness of how much we can do to help people.
cool. Part of what we're doing today.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. So one thing I was going to ask you, because we've got Christmas coming up around the corner now, all the shops are full of
Yeah,
everything.
I know. Still 2 months away, but yes, they are full of things, aren't they?
They are indeed. And with Christmas comes all the festive celebrations, the food, the alcohol. Have you got any tips to try and keep people sort of on track over the festive season at all?
Yeah, I do. And I'm no different to anyone else, actually. Maybe I'm fortunate, but I have, looking at my diary, I've got so many get-togethers, social things, dinners, lunches coming up. Number one, I would always start if you eat breakfast, which I do, if you eat breakfast, start the day with a good breakfast. Don't think, oh, well, I'm going out for lunch, I will just skip breakfast, because by the time you get to your lunch engagement, you'd be so hungry, then you start diving in and eating more potentially rubbishy type food. So always start with a really good breakfast. And if you're going out for dinner or a dinner party or something, always have a good quality lunch and balanced lunch. Make sure you're getting your protein, make sure you keep eating your vegetables. Keep the same meals that you would normally have, keep those in your diet, because it will help you at the other meals as well. If you have a couple of really bad days, don't just jack it all in and think, well, there's no point worrying about it to the new year. Come back the next day and get back into the same old eating patterns that you had before. And again, don't think, oh, I had such a big meal last night, I'm going to skip breakfast. It might be a slightly lighter breakfast, but do still eat breakfast. Set yourself up at the start of the day. Get back on track to where you were before. The more you do that, the more you'll reach the new year without going completely off track, which then becomes more of a mountain to climb to get back to where you were before. Stay hydrated. Don't rush out in the evenings and just consume too much alcohol. Do still think about having some hydrating drinks along the way in the evening, would be another tip I would share.
Actually
And
having
just,
like spaces.
yeah, fine, you've had a glass of wine or a prosecco or beer or whatever it might be, but just try and get some water in there or something like that in the evening. But try and remember to do that. And so that you've got a few pauses along the way that will help not consume too much alcohol, rather than, you start from the beginning to the end of the night and then you wake up the next day and think, why did I do that? Um,
Yep.
and I've been choosing my menus. So I've been going for some dinners, and I've been choosing my menus because you often have to choose these things in advance.
Mm.
I would always go for the less starchy options on the menu. So I don't choose the risottos, I don't choose the pastas, I don't choose the pies, because there's so much starch, pastry, that all becomes sugar overload when it's digested. I try and choose the meats, the fish,
Mm.
things like that are on the menu. Fine to have a few potatoes here and there. Hopefully there's vegetables in there, but just keep away from too many starchy foods.
Right. And actually planning the evening a little bit, as you say, what you're actually going to eat in advance, not going in there ravenously hungry.
Yeah, because I've done it myself. You go in ravenously hungry, and that roll that's beside you on the plate, if it's a dinner party type thing, it's gone in an instant. You haven't even
Yep.
thought about it. Whereas if you don't go ravenously hungry, you might think, do you know what, that bit of bread, I've got this three-course meal ahead of me. I don't need that bread roll. I'll park that. And I'll wait for my starter to come. Got starter, got a main course, I've got a dessert. If you're going to have a dessert, maybe you choose not to have the dessert or something. Maybe you choose the cheese option instead of a sugary, sweeter option. And if you're choosing meals in advance, then you can't go off track because you've chosen it in advance. You can't then suddenly arrive and think, oh God, I really, if you've chosen it in advance and you've chosen the fish option or your turkey option, you can't suddenly think, oh, I wish I'd had the pasta. You've chosen it in advance. So choose wisely.
Choose wisely when you haven't had the two glasses of wine beforehand.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. No, that's brilliant stuff. Great advice. I love that. Yeah, just thinking in advance of it rather than you're just there in the evening and you automatically have more wine or, yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
forward planning.
Forward planning, little bit of planning. Yes, good idea, always.
Cool. Well, I think we've run out of time there, but it's been great to have you on again, and yet really fascinating talking about this stuff. Um, yeah, I'm sure my lack of knowledge is actually reflected throughout the general public to a certain extent. So it's
Absolutely.
great to be able to share this with other people as well.
Yeah, and no question, people's questions, they're never silly questions that people ask me at all, because I've got the knowledge. I wouldn't expect everyone else to have nowhere near the amount of knowledge that I can bring. So no question is a stupid question to ask ever.
Brilliant. And just remind us again, if somebody does want to talk to you, what's the best way of getting in contact with you?
My website is Peyton Principles. My surname is Peyton. So Peyton Principles. I've got Instagram, Peyton Principles Natural Health. I've got a YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health. Yeah, I'm all over most of social media. My website's just Peyton Principles.
Peyton Principles, love it. Brilliant. Thank you again for your time, Carolyn. Been fascinating.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
All right then. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. This is Caroline, the creator of the Peyton Principles Natural Health podcast series. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please click like and subscribe to the entire podcast series.